Okay, welcome to award-winning Joe and Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland from rainy Edinburgh. As soon as we started just now, the rain just came on, so I hope you're all well, and I hope you can hear me. So the way we describe this as being a Dreich day, D-R-E-I-C-H, I think you call it.
Dreich.
And so we'll start the tour.
Well, Mike, we say it's Dreich, but remember, in the northeast of the USA, they're waking up. They're going to have 2 feet of snow in New York City, New Jersey, all the way up to Boston. So if we think it's bad here with a few bits of rain, it's bad in the northeast of the US.
So this isn't too bad then. Okay. So you may recognise this, but we're starting on the other side of the Duke of Wellington statue, and of course the leader against Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, commemorated in this huge statue with him sitting on his horse Copenhagen. And just over from that is the Balmoral Hotel, 5-star luxury hotel, opened in 1903, associated with J.K. Rowling, the person who wrote Harry Potter. She spent some time in a luxury suite here writing the final Harry Potter in the Deathly Hallows. All right. So it's a very elegant hotel. It's built in a it's a bit like a wedding cake, I think. It's so ornamental and so decorative, and it's got lots of different styles of architecture. There's a bit of French in there, there's a bit of Italian in there also, a bit of Grecian, and the idea was to make people from all international areas feeling at home, because there's a bit of them within the architecture of the hotel. The Balmoral, it's called today. It was called the North British Hotel and a railway station hotel originally. And if you look at the clock, it's 3 minutes fast. The idea traditionally is that you could catch your train on time. You always keep it 3 minutes fast. But this year, normally at New Year, they put it to the correct time at 12 midnight. Because of the pandemic this year, they thought they'd make it 3 minutes fast to get rid of 2020. All right, so we'll move on.
We've got Milena Stoyanova said, winter looks kind of like summer in Edinburgh. But we can't argue with that one.
No. You get all the seasons in one day.
You don't come to Edinburgh for a suntan, that's for sure.
Yeah. Don't do this very often on our tours, but we're quite resilient, Joe and I. We're what we call superhero tour guides, but today I'm giving into it a wee bit. So we're moving to the east of Edinburgh, and we're going to go along Waterloo Place, which is named after the Battle of Waterloo, where the Duke of Wellington, of course, was active in that famous battle. And it's a bit of a war memorial, the naming of this street to be Waterloo Place. And would you believe we're getting a bit of sleet at the moment. The temperature that I checked in the car was 3 degrees, so it was quite cold. So this is something different. I don't think we've done a live tour in the sleet or snow so far, so here we are. We'll always give you something new and unexpected. So we're just waiting on the lights to change at the moment, and over here, this building here is now an office block, and it used to be the General Post Office. But before this building was built, there was a theatre here, and this used to be called Shakespeare Square. And many of the theatres, sadly, because they had so much timber in them, went on fire. We even had one down here on Leith Street, where all this new shopping development and the hotel development is. And we're walking over to a kind of hidden gem, I would say. We're going to cross over, and what I'm going to tell you about it before we actually see it a wee bit. If Joe can pick it up slightly, we're going to maybe, if we can safely stand on the middle section, we'll try that. And if you would like to point the camera down there, you can see a rail in the middle of sets of stone. Now, this is a remnant of the 1888 first cable tramway system in Edinburgh that used to run here, and it was the way it worked was much like the San Francisco system, where you had a steel cable which would keep moving underneath that rail, and your tram car had to attach itself to the moving steel cable with what was called grippers. And when they wanted to stop, and if I'm talking to any San Franciscans here, you'll know it can be a bit of a jolt. And that was a drawback from the tramway system, because the driver had to be quite skilled in letting these grippers catch to get the tram moving, and then to release it so that the tram would stop. And as time went on, they realised it was not the really best method, and they introduced an electric method. So this was the original 1888 system. Before that, we're just going to cross over at green. There was a horse-drawn system that came into being in the 1870s. And then in the 1920s, they brought an electric system in, and that was much better. And that lasted until the 1960s. And I've got to say, I actually remember the tram cars in Edinburgh, which, not these ones, not the cable ones, which will give away a wee bit of my age, but never mind, it was great fun. I loved riding the tram cars, they were fantastic. Yeah, so that was the Edinburgh Northern Tramway company that ran that cable tramway, and the first route was from Hanover Street. For the locals, this will ring a bell, from Hanover Street down to Ferry Road, and that was all downhill, and that steel cable was moving and pulling the tram cars along. So we're on Regent Road now, or rather Waterloo Place going to Regent Road. And I'd just like to point out this big archway over here. Now, sorry, okay, gentleman's passing here. So in 1819, this was completed. Before that time, this was a big open gap, a big valley, a big gorge, and it was very difficult to access Edinburgh from the east, from East Lothian, and from the south, from London also. It was a case of having to undertake very narrow, windy, terrible streets with very unsafe buildings, so it took quite a long time to get in the middle of town. So they realised they had to streamline the access, so they made this bridge over the gap and put in these celebratory arches. These are Roman arches with Grecian decorative capitals, Corinthian columns if you look at them, and they were designed by a chap called Elliot, and he was also working with a very well-known guy called George Stephenson, who was a lighthouse designer and the grandfather of Robert Louis Stevenson, because he had to have a really good engineer to get these enormous arches up. Now, in 1819, one of the royals, and he was called Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, and from Germany, and he happened to have married the only legitimate daughter of George IV. Now, George IV had a great old time. He didn't get along with his wife very much, and he had many illegitimate children, and he had one legitimate child, and she was called Princess Charlotte, Princess of Wales. She was a bit like a Princess Diana of her time. Everybody loved her, and she was a very beautiful lady. And unfortunately, well, what happened was Prince Leopold married her, and everybody was set for her succeeding her father as queen, like her present queen, and Prince Leopold would have been like her present Prince Philip. He would have been a prince consort. So he had strong connections here with Britain. So unfortunately, in 1817, Princess Charlotte fell pregnant, and unfortunately it was a stillborn birth. The child had died, and she died shortly after, and the country was absolutely devastated, and it just created a whole lot of grief. But anyway, Prince Leopold still had his position as being very important, and he came here and opened this bridge, Regent Bridge, and we today have still got an inscription, and it's on this other side, but we can maybe move along a little bit. So that was in 1819. Now, probably a better known visit than that one was the 1822 visit of King George IV, and this visit was laying the foundations for processional events, for getting the town all ready for welcoming the king. So it was a bit of a trial run, this big visit, but everybody turned out to see him. Now, Prince Leopold holds the position, and there was a lot of people marrying their cousins back then, especially royals, and he holds the position of being an uncle both to Queen Victoria and to Prince Albert. But I'll tell you something even more interesting. There is strong speculation that Prince Leopold was the father of Prince Albert, and that Prince Albert was illegitimate, and his brother supposedly was the father, but recent research has said that he was the father. So there you go.
I love the European incestuous monarchic history. It's just brilliant.
Is that not amazing?
It's just amazing.
So Prince Leopold eventually did marry somebody else, and he became king of the Belgians, because back then these families that were desperately looking around for monarchies, or, you know, early on he was going to maybe be the Greek king. That didn't happen, so there was another monarchy waiting there, so let's have that one. So he became the king of the Belgians, Prince Leopold.
Yeah, great. Now I just want to add, these buildings you're seeing here are 1, 2, 3, 4 stories high. And this is the hotel here we've got opposite here. But this actually drops down another 6 floors. So there's 6 floors underneath. And so the reception area is actually on floor 7, even though you're going in at ground level. It's very confusing when people go in here. And people do complain sometimes that they've been put down in rooms in the basement. We have to say, well, if you're in the basement, you're going to be another 14 floors underneath. So just if you're checking into these hotels, don't worry if they put you down below street level. You're actually not in the basements.
Yeah, because, you know, this is a bridge we're on, and you may not think you are on it. And these arches are 64 feet in depth, down, well, from the top of the archway down to the bottom of the street below. So quite a distance. So quite a major achievement when you think about it, going back to 1819, that this was a feat of engineering, massive feat of engineering.
We got Marianne Rose saying, that's nothing, my cousin is my uncle.
And of course, yeah, because you know, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, they were also first cousins, so very close relations. Yeah. And Queen Victoria's youngest child was called Prince Leopold, and unfortunately he died in his 20s of haemophilia, because haemophilia was an illness that was inherited, and of course they had connections with the Russian royal family, and I think the young son had haemophilia as well.
Yeah,
the son of Nicholas,
Zarevich, wasn't it? Zarevich.
The young Zarevich, yeah. So we're going to go into this cemetery here, our burial ground, and it's very unusual because there's no church here. It is not a graveyard with a religious connection as such, although many people in here did believe, and it was founded by the Incorporated Trades. Now, Edinburgh is quite a merchant city, and many tradespeople were here, and they had guilds, and they were fundraisers, and they funded charity workhouses and all sorts of things, and for themselves they founded a graveyard. So many of the self-made people, individuals, wanted to be buried in this very unusual, what's called Old Calton Graveyard, because before this was here there was a settlement called Old Calton. So we'll just let me go up the steps. I think this is a perfect day for visiting a graveyard.
There's so many tours that you can do in each of the individual cemeteries here in Edinburgh. There's so many famous people that are buried in, and we do organise specific tours if people are interested to go and see some of the old cemeteries. But this is right in the city centre, and it's so easy to access. And also it's a little bit of peace and tranquility. You just go through an arch and suddenly you feel like you're in a piece of... I mean, it is so peaceful now.
It is.
Buses.
You got away from all the traffic noise.
You can hear the birds.
That's right. And this is like City of the Dead. It's the one cemetery in Edinburgh. I wouldn't describe the other ones. If you know of the one in Paris...
Père Lachaise.
Yeah, this is a bit similar, I think. It's got these big mausoleums and quite intricate sculpture work, which some of the other cemeteries don't have. And its position is quite remarkable, I think. Yeah. Got to watch
like the one in Glasgow.
Yeah, like the one in Glasgow. Yeah. Watch your step now, folks.
That's me. Folks being me.
See, Joe and I are accustomed to guiding groups. So
Safety first. Safety first.
A wee bit of a slippage there. So, I'd like you first of all to look at this tomb, this circular tomb here. Now, it is very plain, and it's to David Hume. Now, David Hume was a philosopher of the 18th century, and he wrote a treatise on human nature, and he was very much thinking about passions over reason. Passions over reason. Now, you may be familiar with the Enlightenment in the 18th century and moral philosophy and reasoned thought. Well, he believed that people were only human. They had their good sides and their bad sides, and he was one of those who contributed to the Romantic movement. But perhaps in his own day, the main downfall for him was he was an atheist. He did not believe in God, and hence you've got this tomb, which is based on a monument in Ravenna in Italy called the Theodoric Monument. Theodoric was a leader of a tribe from the north, what we know as Germany and the northern countries today, which invaded Italy in the 6th century. And it was like overturning their beliefs and their cultures. So the designer of this tomb was Robert Adam, and we have spoken about him quite a lot. So this was very much an interesting type of architecture for Adam, because he visited Italy quite a lot and was inspired by places like Ravenna. And I think from a distance, it doesn't look as striking as it does when you're up close here. It's quite a powerful image here. He didn't want any religious lettering connections on this tomb, but one of his descendants was Christian, and there is some Christian references just above the door, but simply David Hume, leading light of the 18th century here in Edinburgh. And I don't know if
I was going to say
something.
We've talked a lot about Muriel Spark, and in the film, Jean Brodie in the book, she refers to David Hume. She always says to the girls, remember girls, you're citizens of Edinburgh, the city of Hume and Boswell. You're Europeans, not dowdy provincials.
Excellent. What a great thing. What a great speech. Now we're just going to turn here to the American Civil War memorial here. Now, this statue to Abraham Lincoln at the time was the only statue to an American president outside of the USA. And today, it is the only statue in Scotland to an American president. Why is it here? Because 6 Scotsmen left Edinburgh to go and fight in the American Civil War. Now, what was the reasoning for doing that? It was because of emancipation. They were church-going people. They believed and had been brought up to believe that slavery was a very bad thing, And in the monument here, you can see this bronze figure of a slave. Now, one of the men who went over there was Sergeant Major John McEwen, and he fought, and he came back, and he survived, and came to Edinburgh, lived out some of his remaining years here, and then died. And his wife, at his death, claimed a widow's pension from the US representatives here in Edinburgh, but they were not going to entertain that. And at that point, the powers that be spurred them into erecting this monument in the 19th century. She was not going to get that pension unless she moved to the United States, and that's what she did. But she left a legacy of the people in Edinburgh thinking, we must commemorate these people. We cannot forget them because they were very important in what they did. And it's some of the detailing here, if you look closely. Many people will come in here and they'll miss this, but if you look here, there is a representation of the old flag of the United States here. And on this side is cotton. And on this side are thistles here. So there is strong symbolism there with slavery, the plantations, the Scottish connection with the Scots that went over there to fight at that time. And where did the money come from to build the monument? Well, there wasn't people here who were going to do that, so they had to reach out to J.D. Rockefeller and to Andrew Carnegie, who were only too happy to give money for this statue of Abraham Lincoln to be cast in the United States and brought over here and erected here today. So you can also see some of the wording around here. You've got emancipation, and if we move around, we've got suffrage. We've got the names of the people who were active. You've got Alexander Smith, who was one of the other men who was sent over there, who went over there rather. We've got Union, and it was unveiled in 1893, and it's in granite. It's this long-lasting granite, and I think maybe Joe's already picked this up, but you can see where they were connected with these Scotsmen.
And the last base word is education. So it's
yes,
education,
education,
emancipation, suffrage,
yeah,
and union.
So it's a very powerful monument, and this is something that it's easy to miss. And when I do coach tours, I'm sure Joe does the same, you're passing along Waterloo Place and you say, now if you look over to your right, you might just see Abraham Lincoln. Yeah. So here he is.
And it's right in the city centre. And I think you can't underestimate the influence that the Scots had, not only during the Civil War, but obviously during the American Revolutionary War. And how many Scots, or people from Scottish descent and Scots, official Scots, were actually there at the signing of the Declaration of Independence as well. What a feisty mob.
And the Outlander, of course, if we've got Outlander fans there, there's a connection with the Revolution, and Jamie Fraser had some involvement over at that time.
There is another monument to the American soldiers, which is in Princes Street Gardens, for the soldiers who came over to fight in the First World War.
Yes, that's right, right, yeah. But I think it's a very fine monument. I think it's very well detailed and quite a striking thing. So we'll move further over here, and we're still going to be talking about emancipation. And what we've got is this big obelisk. Now this is Tall Needle, again, which is one of the things that stands out in the Edinburgh skyline, and you can't miss it. And it was built by Thomas Hamilton, who was a very well-known architect of the 19th century, and it commemorates those people who were, what's the word? They represented the common people, because in the 18th century you could not vote here unless you were male and unless you had land. And there was no such thing as a secret ballot, so that was open to a lot of corruption also. Now also, because of that division, and that most people didn't have the vote, you had exploitation, especially the wealthy landowning classes could exploit from the political view and get people in there that were going to represent just them, just their sole interests and not the wider interests of the people. And we talk about Thomas Muir here at the top. He was one of those who demonstrated against this, who was for the common people getting the vote, and he eventually, for that, was deported for 14 years to Australia, Thomas Muir. So he was a martyr, and today this monument is described as the Martyrs Monument. Political Martyrs Monument.
And it was interesting, last week we were talking about excuse me, the political activism of Robert Burns. And this is almost 100 years after Robert Burns, or well, about 60 years after Robert Burns. So the activism still was part of the Scottish psyche about, about equality and suffrage. And this monument was erected in 1844. And there's some good quotations I might want to read out there, Mike, on the side here about the
we've got one.
The judgments.
I know what has been done these 2 days will be rejudged. This is the speech when he has been. This is William Skirving when he's been brought to account to answer for the charges against him. And above this is, I have devoted myself to the cause of the people. It is a good cause. It shall ultimately prevail. It shall finally triumph. And this is a speech of Thomas Muir, again, when he was being brought to account in the court of the judiciary, 1793. So very strong, memorable words here.
And at the time, you have to think of what was happening in Europe and around the world, because it's part of the revolutionary period, or the French Revolution, the American Revolution already taking place. So activism, political activism for people in Scotland was fermenting quite a lot at the time during that revolutionary period.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe significantly we're getting a bit of sunshine on the Martyrs Monument. It's nice.
And you can see this all over Edinburgh.
It's such a plain monument. In fact, you may like to know that the Scott Monument in Princess Street, the very decorative Gothic monument which finally developed there, the original design for it by William Playfair was like this. It was just going to be an obelisk, but the judges decided against that.
And that's so poetic. We've got the sun shining on the Martyrs Monument.
It is. It's quite significant. Yeah.
It might not be religious, but maybe somebody's looking after them.
So the other ones, maybe, I've spoken about Thomas Muir, but the other ones were Thomas Fesh Palmer, William Skirving, Maurice Margaret, and Joseph Gerald. These are the others. And it's erected by the Friends of the Parliamentary Reform in England and Scotland, 1844. So the graveyard is quite picturesque at the moment. It's getting a glimpse of sunshine.
It's also the place of rest for lots of the old actors and actresses who used to perform in the theatre there. So there's quite a few famous actors who are buried here as well.
In fact, I was quite interested to see that Wendy Wood, who was an early activist for Scottish independence, is interred in here.
That's right.
And so we're moving down the back of the David Hume's, and we've got significant
Somebody
people.
just pointed out that linking in with Imbolc and the Celtic Festival, and that quotation from Muriel Spark, that's Muriel Spark's birthday.
Oh, right. Fantastic.
Clinky dinks.
Yeah. So,
You guys, our viewers are really good.
Yes. And look at the lavender here. We've got some lavender coming out, so it's has a sparkly colour here too.
I have to say, the bulbs are all coming up now. The snowdrops are peeping up, and the daffodils are coming up. I've even got rhubarb coming up in my garden.
Yeah. We've got garlic coming up in the garden as well. In front.
Oh, the wild garlic, yeah.
Yeah. So we're coming down this little pathway to the wall. Now this is a very, very high wall, because you know when they had to put the road in Waterloo Place, they had to remove some of the interments, and they had to be moved to a northern part of the cemetery on the other side of Waterloo Place, with the original gravestones had been carried from here across there. So when we go down to this next tomb, you may want to know that we are at the top of like a big steep cliff, a big high wall, because that wall supports the earth, the ground and the burials. So just think of the pressure against this wall, the supporting wall.
Just got a question. Somebody says, Vivi Mascasini said, is it possible to see this virtual tour again? Yep, we will post this up on YouTube, so you can follow us up on YouTube as well as a live broadcast.
Yes.
We store everything on YouTube. Just look for Joe and Mike's virtual tours. Somebody also mentioned that when they were in Edinburgh, they stayed in the apartments overlooking the cemetery, and this is the apartments here that overlook the cemetery. And these are lovely apartments.
Yeah, I don't know if Margie is on here, but Margie was one of my clients on an Outlander tour, and I think you call it Prince's Apartments or something like that further over here,
Yeah.
and I think that group stayed in there. Yeah. You see all these recognisable names like William Sanderson, because Sanderson were a family of wine merchants, and I mentioned Arthur Sanderson on an earlier tour, who they transported liquor, of course, into the port of Leith, and sent whisky out as well. So
Margie Hutchison said she stayed in there for a week.
Yeah.
And Viva from Argentina says, thank you very much. De nada, Viva.
yes.
De nada.
So we're coming
nice
down
to
to this
comment.
one, which is William Blackwood. William Blackwood's tomb. And if you can see, like the elegant sculpture work, these rosettes here, like these rose reliefs, you can tell that this is somebody of a higher level of importance, and so he was, of the 18th century, William Blackwood. And in here is his tomb. Now, William Blackwood was an 18th century bookseller. He came from a humble background, but like Robert Burns, he was very well educated in spite of his kind of humble childhood. And he early on went to Glasgow and trained there as a bookseller, and then came back to Edinburgh and opened a bookshop in what's called South Bridge Street, on the other side of the valley. And today there's still a bookshop there called Blackwell's, funnily enough. And William liked to sell unusual books, like curious books, curiosities, antiquarian books, rare books, and was very popular because of that. Now, fortunately for him, he came into contact with the Ballantyne family. And the Ballantynes were printers, and they happened to print Walter Scott's books. And he was able to take over the role of publisher of Walter Scott's work, and Tales of My Landlord and Old Mortality were a couple of the books that Blackwood was involved with. Blackwood became more and more successful. He moved from South Bridge Street, he moved on to Princes Street, and then he moved on to George Street. And we did visit the shop on George Street on an earlier tour. So he went from strength to strength, and then came up with the idea of a review, because there was a publication going around Edinburgh called the Edinburgh Review, which would be criticisms of various things, literature, politics, whatever, religion, and it was a very liberal, what we call Whiggish publication. And Blackwood thought, well, I'm going to do something different, and he brought out Blackwood's magazine, which for short was known as MAGA, and it countered some of the ideas from the Edinburgh Review, and it became very, very popular. It was a critical publication, and they reviewed various authors and poets such as Coleridge, such as Wordsworth and Tennyson, and later on Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and they had a huge foothold in literary criticism. And after William died, other members of the family took on the business, and Blackwood's actually survived into the 1970s, their shop in George Street, and I vaguely remember it having been there. So,
it used to be a university bookshop as well.
Yeah, university, yeah.
Edinburgh University bookshop.
Yeah, they were more into like educational books and religious books as well. So they did embrace a huge subject area. So this is William Blackwood's burial place. And when I said to you about the incorporation of trades, who this graveyard belonged to, maybe it makes sense when you got people like him, self-made people who are under the umbrella of being merchants, to have been connected with other merchants and running their own burial ground, if you like. And quite an amazing one it is. It could do with a bit of tender loving care, but such as Edinburgh, we've got so much history that, you know.
Well, when Patty Blackwood comes back next time, she can get a scrubbing brush and give it a little bit of a clean.
There you go.
There's a task.
There's a job for you, Patty.
Yeah. For the Blackwood family coming over here, you've got a job to do.
Yes, there's a message. There's a message. So we will turn around and move up the hill.
I just got a question here, Mike. They're saying, is the cemetery used for recent burials?
No.
I don't think so. I think
No.
you're going to have, if you're going to be buried here, you'd have to have the real special permission. And the other half of the cemetery is known as the orphan cemetery. But it's nothing to do with orphans, just because it's been orphaned from this cemetery. So they call the little one the orphan. But people are saying, I can't find the graves of the orphans. There are no graves of orphans there. It's just called the orphan ceremony.
And
Cemetery ceremony.
And there was a lot of cordoners, which is an old word for shoemakers, because Old Calton, and when the new road that we walked on was developed, it swept away that settlement, and a lot of like soul trading shoemakers lived there, and there's some interments over there with the typical instrument of shoemaking, which is a sort of curved bladed knife that you used to cut the leather from as well. And there's loads of merchants in here, there's loads of architects, there's loads of artists. It's a site of enlightened thought.
Yeah, that's what I would say. It's one of the Enlightenment cemeteries.
It's like you feel you're paying a pilgrimage when you come here. It's just so significant. You're surrounded by all these great shaker and movers. It's just wonderful. So we're coming to the end of the tour now, and we're going to be covering, we've got the watchtower from the old jail, the Old Calton jail, but we'll be talking about that and moving further along Regent Road on not the next tour, but the tour after the next tour. And next time we are going to be in Queensferry again, because we're hoping we've got our sound sorted.
And hopefully it's not so windy as it was the last time.
Yeah.
But we've got a few requests to revisit South Queensferry, so we're going to go back down to the bridges in South Queensferry. Hopefully it will not be a force 10 gale, and we'll be able to catch a breath. Last time we could hardly breathe because it was the wind was taking our voices away. But I've got another little thank you to everybody. And if you're in the northeast of the US, stay safe, stay indoors, because that looks like a terrible storm that you're going to get there. I hear a lot of you are going about shoveling a lot of snow.
Yeah, just giving you an update on the COVID situation here just now. We're still in lockdown, which means that we can meet with somebody from another household. 2 people can meet together as a maximum, and a lot of all the non-essential shops are shut, but essential places like supermarkets, food shops and chemists, of course, are open, and masks are mandatory if you're actually indoors and in a public place or walking with quite a few other people. So, but we're getting the vaccinations and we're looking to improving. Every week we're hearing better things. So I hope the same as with you. So stay safe, and once again, there's a PayPal link. We'd feel, if you feel like it, feel free to donate, because it does really help us to keep going with the tours, and YouTube as well. We've got our tours always go onto YouTube, so we're always looking for more subscribers on there as well.
Yep.
Okay.
And also, I think tying up with a comment about St. Bridget's Day, it's also equivalent to Groundhog Day in the US, which I think is tomorrow. Is Groundhog Day tomorrow? I think it is.
It might be. It might be. Okay.
So a big thank you from Joe here behind the camera.
And thank you from me. Thanks for watching.
Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup. And thank you in every language. Konnichiwa.
See you next Monday.
Bye-bye.
Cheers for now. Bye-bye.